Hello everyone and welcome to another ASP.NET application development video. This is episode number 15 and joining us is our host, Mr. Nelson Lakay. Nelson!
Hey.
Hey. Also joining us, Mr. Zach Parrish.
Hey, good evening.
And myself, Jason Busby. So picking up where we left off last time, Nelson, with the project management system, what do you have planned for us tonight?
All right, well, we still got to finish up a little bit more boilerplate stuff before we actually start, writing the application. In the last video, we set up in Hibernate, but we didn't talk about how we were going to get the query model to work. And if you remember from I can't remember how many videos ago it was, but we went over what the query model was, and basically it's just going to be a mirror of these objects, but void of all functionality. And right now it's not a very good example because these two test classes that we made in the previous video just to test out in Hibernate, they don't have any functionality on them. But once we start working with our getting our domain model all fleshed out, they're going to have a bunch of functionality that we're not going to want to carry along with us when we do queries off the database and when we pass that data around. Now, traditionally, this was handled by something like AutoMapper, where you would use something like AutoMapper, or you would manually map your domain objects to DTOs, and then those DTOs would be sent to, a view model that would be sent over the network that would be serialized or whatever. But in this case, we're going to be using a different approach, where we're going to, like I said, we're going to have a replica of all of these classes in this project, and they're going to be mapped to the exact same tables as the domain model objects are. So,
Okay, now the domain objects that we have right now, the address, the user, etc. Now those were just temporary examples, right?
Yeah, just for I guess we could just continue on with these two objects, because we're just going to throw it away once we start actually working on the application. So these, just kind of ignore these things, pretend they don't exist just for demonstration purposes while we test out what we need to make work in the query model.
Okay. But that means in the query model, we're going to start replicating the things we're finding right now up in the domain model.
Yes, we're going to be adding pretty much. Actually, what I'm going to do, we're not going to be doing this in the real application because, like I said, these classes in the real application are going to have their functionality, they're going to have validation, they're going to have all their logic, and then the query model, you don't want that. But because these test objects don't have any logic, I'm just going to take this folder, hit Control-C, go down here, hit Control-V, hit Control-Shift-R, go up to use Resharper command, go up to adjust namespaces, and now we have a clone of these two objects, or these two classes. And then I'm going to rename them address DTO and user DTO. Is this the right? See, that's why I'm renaming them, because I don't know where I am. Here we go. User DTO. And I'm also going to instruct Resharper that DTO is indeed an abbreviation, so it stops yelling at us. Okay, so we're not going to worry about writing our repositories, just like we didn't worry about writing our domain services here. We're just going to be querying these things directly in the index controller. Now, awesomely enough, the only thing we have to do here is tell AutoMapper to create these maps just like they would be if they had been created in the domain model, but give them a different table name than what it would normally assign it. Basically, we're just overriding the table name. And then once we do that, and because these two objects will match up in their properties, everything will just work magically.
Okay.
So all we have to really do is introduce another attribute, and I'm going to do that in the .base folder, just like we did with owns. It's not the cleanest solution to kind of get things kind of creeping up in our .base project into our query model, but I don't know. It's the only place to put it right now. And I'm going to call this, I'm going to create a new class, and it's going to be use table name of attribute. And he's going to inherit from attribute, and we're going to bring using system, and then he's going to have an attribute usage of attribute targets dot class. he's going to have a constructor that's going to take a single type or single argument of type, and this is going to be the type that we want to override the table name of, if that makes any sense. So we'll just say, we'll call this argument or this parameter uses table name of, and actually we don't want to do that. We want to initialize an audit property with a private setter. Okay, so now we have the use table name of attribute. It doesn't have any behavior associated with it, but we might as well just go and show you what it's going to look like once we have that logic wired in. So the user DTO is going to use table name of, and he's going to be user. And of course this throws because it's not valid, because it's only valid on a class, because I am missing a parenthesis. That's one of the most confusing errors I've gotten from the C# compiler. When you do this, it thinks that you're not assigning it to a class for some reason. Anyway, so, and then in our address DTO, we'll do the same thing. We'll say use table name of, and then pass in type of address. So again, there's no behavior associated with this attribute yet, but you can kind of see where I'm going with it. Basically, we're saying this class, when we go ahead and map it, we want the table name to be overridden with whatever the AutoMapper would decide the table name of this class is.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so to implement this logic, it's pretty easy. We just go into the our services, go into our AutoMapper, and the get table name method, we're just going to have to override it. Our class instance, we want the entity type. So we want to go ahead and grab the custom attribute, use table name of entity type. So I don't know, use table name of attribute equals entity type dot get custom attributes type of use table name of attribute, and then false, no inherit, and then we'll just want first or default. And then we're going to say if use table name of attribute is not null, then we're just going to return, or hold on, we can go ahead and make this a little nicer. And this isn't recursive, but it'll serve our purposes just fine. Attribute dot, and of course I did not cast it to what it needs to be casted to. So it's going to be use table name attribute as use table name of attribute, and then now we'll have our uses table name of and a type ID object. Okay. There we go. Then I'm used to being at a higher resolution. So basically all we have here is we're overriding the entity type with whatever we are redirecting to, so to speak, from the use table name of attribute.
Right.
So that's actually pretty much it. There's no more logic that we need to implement. We can go ahead and test this by, in our web app, going into our index controller and changing the behavior of our show users method to query on a user DTO rather than the user object or user class. And if our changes worked, then the behavior will be the exact same.
Okay, hang on one second. Also, let me get this up for you. And hang on, we've got somebody else with us. 1 second. Let's go ahead and pause. Okay, Nelson, we are back. And for those of you that saw the error that popped up just a second ago,
pretend you did.
Yeah, just pretend you
didn't
did.
see
Now,
anything.
apparently, the database got deleted. May have been me, who knows, but...
Yeah, the database we created in, many previous videos ago was
Yeah, it
gone
was-
and had to be recreated, so we rebuilt that real quick off camera.
But nothing in code was changed whatsoever.
Mm.
So Nelson refreshed the browser after the database was put back in. This is what we get now.
Yep. So, I mean, we're not going anywhere at the moment. That's why we're getting a 404.
But you can definitely jump down to the bottom and open up the workbench.
Yeah. So here are the two tables. So you see that there's only two tables that were created. If the code that we written didn't work properly,
We would have had 4, wouldn't we?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. So we see that at least so far, it's being redirected properly.
Okay, looks good. Cool.
And now we got to go somewhere in the address bar. If I can just remember where that is. Index and then / and we can go to create user and show users. So index / create user will create a user and return a smiley face. And then now we can go to show users. So that was using the user object. And now if we go to show users, we get a user.
Nice.
And let me go ahead and create more users really quickly. Keep on hitting F5, go back, and we see we have more users. So you see that they're being properly pulled over from these two tables. So, yeah,
Nice.
that's about it for the Hibernate stuff.
Okay.
Cool. What now?
So next thing we want to set up.
All right, so now we have to set up HAML and dotLess. So it's pretty much just going to be the exact same as what we had going in the other videos, where we just need to reference some DLLs and put in some configuration entries.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and open up our solution in Windows Explorer and create a lib folder, which we already have, and we're going to have to pull in NHaml and dotLess. So, and if you remember from the other videos, the NHaml build is actually a custom build because we had to fix some bugs in it before we brought it into our project.
Mm-hmm.
And so just go to the other video if you need to find out what we did. Hopefully one day they'll release a version that doesn't have all those bugs, but whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the PDBs and the DLLs and dump them in the folder. Then I'm going to go back, grab dotLess, put the PDB and the DLL in here, and then reference them in our web app, which is going to be the only place that we need to reference them. Actually, that was a lie. We could implement dotLess in our service layer, which is probably what we're going to do. But NHaml, at least, is going to be referenced directly in our web app. Alrighty, so actually, no. I lied again about that. I forgot that we pulled over the entirety of our application into the space application class. We're going to do all the NHaml configuration in the space application class, which resides in a different class library, our honeycomb.web.
Okay.
So sorry about that. So we're going to pull in our two assemblies. And so as far as code goes, all we got to do is find our application start, which is somewhere.
Right there.
And above our, it doesn't really matter where we do this, actually. I'm just going to put it above our autofact stuff because we're going to be factoring that out later. We're going to be doing view engines.engines.add, and then new NHaml .web.mvc.NHaml view engine. So all we did was add the NHaml view engine to our application. Now all we have to do is configure it. And to configure it, we just got to grab over some boilerplate configuration. First of all, we need to add the config section for NHaml. And we got to grab the NHaml element. And then I just replaced half the file. Sorry about that. Auto recompile we want to be true because we're in development. Template compiler we want C#4. Encode HTML we want true, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Use tabs we want true because we're in Windows. And indent size 2. No, let's leave that as default. Now we need the system assembly. We'll also need a few other assemblies to work right. We won't need these right off the bat, but we'll need them eventually, so I'm going to go ahead and add them. We're going to need honeycomb dot query model, I'm sure, and we're definitely going to need web app. And then I'm not going to worry about adding namespaces until we start adding helpers. So yeah, that's it for NHaml. I guess I can go ahead and test it by converting this CSHTML file, or the non-existent CSHTML file. I'm just going to go ahead and delete these guys and create one for index. And I'm just going to piggyback on an existing view. I'm just going to do create user. And then, of course, Jason doesn't have the Resharper templates, so we'll go over adding those later. I'm just going to go ahead and add a code file. And we're going to call this, what was it? Create user. Again, this is just for testing purposes. We just want to make sure that everything's all working. So now once I find the % key, actually, I've never, there we go. We're going to do H1.
I didn't say anything.
Copy that. Alrighty, so now we have a basic view that we're going to return out for our create user. So instead of returning content, we're just going to say return view. We're not going to pass in the view model because we don't need to worry about that at the moment. And Resharper is going to yell at you about NHaml. I don't know if we've covered that already, but it doesn't know anything about NHaml. So it's not going to detect that we do have a file called create user. So just ignore Resharper. Yeah, at this point we should just be able to build and run. So I'm going to go over here. I built refresh, and that's show users. We want create user. Yay.
Nice.
Okay, so that's NHaml. That's all set up. I did mention, we might as well just briefly mention it right here, but I did resolve the HTML encoding thing before. It turns out, not surprisingly, that NHaml does not respect the HTML string class like Razor does. And if you guys recall, it's where if you return an HTML string object, the Razor will not encode it again.
Right.
But if you don't, it will encode it. Now, NHaml doesn't care. It just calls toString on whatever you try to print out. It's not going to respect that at all. So what you have to do instead is you have to say encode HTML, which is going to go ahead and encode every single thing we pass through using the equal syntax. So remember, it's equals and then an expression. So here's a C# expression. I can just prove that it's an expression by doing that. And so that could have easily been a result from the view model, for example, that we printed over. And if I tried to put HTML in here, or, I don't know, blink. If I tried to put an HTML in here with the encode as true, we get it properly encoded, which is what we want 99.9% of the time. However, sometimes we have helpers that we need to actually return HTML. And I really do like the HTML string scheme that the MVC team came up with, but unfortunately, like I said, NHaml doesn't recognize that. And I really got to fork them one day and just fix all these things. But to print out, once you have HTML encoding on in your web.config, to actually print out HTML when you know you want to, just do exclamation point equals. And now you have... You what?
I said not equals.
Oh, yeah, I
Never
guess.
mind.
And now you get some hey in there, which fortunately Internet Explorer 10, or sorry, Internet Explorer 9, which is for some reason defaulted to Jason's computer, does not respect the blink tag anymore, which is actually kind of nice. And here we got Firefox. And let's just go ahead and index create user. And we have, do we have blinking?
We
Blinking
do.
hey.
It is blinking. You probably can't see it because of the capture rate on your end.
Yeah. Okay, so it turns out Firefox 4 does not completely mark it as obsolete, which is unfortunate.
Well, you answered the question for yourself.
There you go.
Anyway, so that's how you deal with HTML encoding with NHaml. Again, one day I'm going to fork it and make it respect what it should respect, which is the HTML strings. All right, so finally we got to deal with the dotLess, and I'm going to just bring up a simple implementation of dotLess that we're going to be using in the beginning of this application. But eventually, what we're going to do once we have some more, once we start actually needing this code to be written, and we start writing this code for dealing with paths, for dealing with temporary files, we're going to write a cache for it. But at the moment, we're going to be doing what we just did in the previous video, which is every single time somebody requests a specific path, our controller is going to go out, it's going to recompile the less, and it's going to send it directly to the browser. So if you guys remember how that was all set up.
Well, unfortunately, it's been a bit of time. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, we're going to go ahead and implement that in the honeycomb.web.services namespace. So we're going to call this our dotLess compiler service, if I could spell. And then what he's going to do is he's going to spool up a dotLess engine, which requires a reference to the dotLess engine library. Or core, sorry. So now that we have that reference, we can go ahead and do a private dotLess core engine. What was that? Oh, less engine, there we go. And we're just going to bring that in, and we're going to say not underscore, we're going to just do engine. And then we're going to have a, hold on, what am I doing? Equals new less engine, and we're going to leave that all as default, and then we're going to have a string compile less string CSS. And he's going to go out and just do engine dot, whatever that thing was called, transform to CSS. Sorry, this is going to be less a return CSS. And then source file name is just going to be null because we want it to print it or return it directly out of this. So a pretty worthless class overall, but once we start implementing caching and stuff, most of that will go here. And then now we have to register with AutoFac, and this isn't a particularly interesting registration because we're not actually implementing any interfaces. We're just going to be registering a type .less compiler service as self, and then he's going to go in our singleton instance or singleton scope, or application scope, or wherever you learned web development from, that scope. It's just in every single platform they call it something different, and I'm stuck on application scope, which is what it's called in Cold Fusion. So now we just need, what am I doing? We need another controller. We need a resources controller. And of course, we still haven't configured JSON's template since the last time I mentioned it. So we have to do alt insert L for class. So resources controller, he's going to implement controller. He's going to have a constructor that takes in a .less compiler service. And we're just going to call this .less compiler. And then at the moment, eventually, if we ever do end up with CoffeeScript, this is where CoffeeScript processing would go, or if we ever do end up with JavaScript processing at all, which we probably should do for compression and minification and concatenation, that's where this will go in here.
Okay.
But for now, we're just going to have a action result styles, string styles, and these are going to be file names to the styles. And we're just going to go ahead and we're going to set our content type, or sorry, our response.content type to text CSS, and then we're going to return stuff. We're going to return content styles, which needs to be an array, because we're going to pass, or no, hold on. This is going to be a comma delineated list of styles that we can pull out of. So it takes them all and combines them. So we're going to do dot select. There we go. File dot, and now I have to bring in file. Or this is actually something that irritates me and something that you'll eventually run into when working with ASP.NET controllers. But ASP.NET controllers helpfully have a method called file, and I can show you that right here. So that conflicts with the class called file, which is in the system.io namespace. So to reference it, you have to do system.io.file. So we're going to read all text, and then we're going to bring it into our dotLess compiler, compile less, and then we're going to string.joinAll. There we go. If we didn't have an error, this would be great, but we do. What do we have? Don't tell me you take a... No? Fine. So this is going to be the path, and we have to decorate the path anyway, so I'm just going to break that out into a lambda. The path is going to be decorated with the app domain current path, and then slash resources slash styles slash the path that was requested. So app domain dot current domain dot path, or sorry, directory, base directory, and then comma path. And then we're still throwing an error because join requires, we don't want join, we want concat. There we go. That took longer to write than it should have. And then, of course, the screen width is just horrible. And then, yeah, I don't know how I'm going to break this apart very easily. Here we go.
That looks good.
So yeah, now we got a blob of text that does different stuff.
Well put.
So you notice that we're not putting any, we're not doing any expire headers. We're not doing any processing or anything that we should be. But we'll leave that till later once we have more base code implemented. For example, this whole locating a resource stuff should really be in some path service, but we're not going to worry about that at the moment until we need it for something else. So we can go ahead and test this by creating a resources folder, creating a styles folder, and then creating a styles folder, and then adding in a dotLess file, or a less file. So we're just going to do site dotLess, and we're just going to do body background red, color blue, H1, I don't know, font size 20 pt, just to make sure less is working properly. And then in our view, our index, create user, we're just going to go ahead and do a, first try, style, or a link, sorry, type equals text CSS, rel equals style sheet, source equals resources styles, styles equals site dot less. And then if we build this and we don't get any errors, it should
Do you mean for there to be a question mark?
Was there a question mark?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, just checking.
It's not... Hold on. I just have a syntax error somewhere in the HTML. Because it's not finding the... there it is. Oh, what am I doing? Source is for JavaScript. href is for Blink. Sorry, my bad. And then... It's not text. So now we're getting this. We're getting a 404 not found, which is probably because I'm thinking resources styles, we don't have a route set up. And we're going to be dealing with routes a little bit later. Yeah. Or no? Resources controller should be... Of course, Alt Tab doesn't work because that would be too convenient. Styles.
Won't the Alt Tab work if you hit the scroll lock?
I think so.
Hold on. No, it was my bad.
How is it your bad?
It's behavior that I haven't exactly figured out. So, but I ran into this before. Look at this. It redirects me over to, or it was redirecting me a second ago, unless I'm crazy. I think I am going crazy.
You heard it here first, folks.
So we're still getting an awesome 404.
You want to pause it for just a second while you look a little deeper into this?
Yeah, I probably did something dumb.
Oh, it's all good. Hang on, let me go ahead and get a pause going. Okay, Nelson, we've resumed.
Yeah. Well, apparently, I chose the only action name that I've experienced with ASP.NET MVC that doesn't want to ever be accessed. Resources styles will not work. You're going to have to change the name to something else. And for those of you who are saying that's probably just a problem with my code and I'm lying, let me go ahead and change it to styles with an A at the end. Come over here, change it to styles with an A at the end, and we'll get a different error, but that's just because I forgot something. This is the error that we want, because you see that's actually hitting our code now. Previously, it was just returning a 404. So we need to choose a better name for this, and I'm just going to call this process styles. And that's what it's going to be called. And then my create user, I'm going to change this to process styles. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to add a...
You need 3 S's in process?
no, I need 2 S's.
Oh, okay.
See, well, yeah.
I
Well,
lost the capitalization. Totally my bad.
No, we're going to fix that in a second here. But before I say that, we're going to add eventually an HTML helper that'll do that for us, to where we can just tell it to go ahead and add a bunch of styles, but we're not going to deal with that right now. Instead, to make this less confusing, I'm going to add a dash to that. And in order to get this to work properly, we're going to actually be able to override the name of the action as far as ASP.NET MVC sees it by using the action name attribute to process dash styles, just so the capitalization doesn't get confusing, because you should really not use capital letters in a URL. But obviously you can't put a dash in a method name.
Right.
So yeah, so now that we have that working, we can now go to process styles and we can get back to resolving that other error that came up, which was just me forgetting a single piece of code. Now, originally, this method is process styles. It's going to take a comma delineated list of styles. So we have site.less, and maybe systems.less, or whatever, however many things we want. It's going to combine them, minify them, and send them back. I actually forgot to split the styles that were passed in by commas. So just add if you're wondering why the error was coming up, if you look at it really carefully, it's rather self-evident. It's trying to go to a style name called S, which happens to be the first letter of site.less. That's because .select, I was assuming that I was selecting off an array of strings, but instead I was selecting off a single string, which is an IEnumerable of characters. So he was literally going to go and find every single style with the name of S, I, and then T, and then E, and so on. And obviously those files don't exist and it threw an exception. But to fix that, we're going to go ahead and split on commas. And this should pretty much wrap up less for now. We're definitely going to be revisiting this, but there we go. And now for our seizure-inducing style, we have...
Nice.
Yeah, that's pretty close. Wow.
Alrighty. So that's HAML, less, and the last of the NHibernate stuff.
Probably a good point to call it right here with all of that configured and set up. You think? All right.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, with that, that is going to wrap up episode 15. Thank you, Nelson and Zach. And we'll see you guys in episode 16.
See ya.